Good evening. I'm Louis Beverage, staff here at the beloved Community Center, and I'm just happy to be here this evening. Anytime we got a group of progressive people to gather and think about the issues that impact us on a daily basis, it's an honor and a pleasure. We have our friend George Friday and a wonderful panel here gathered. The National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms, and they're presenting their session on the Wake Up Call for Civil Liberties. So many things going on in our environment at this day and time that are infringing on pretty much every right that we have, and we have to learn how to come together and address those issues in a civil fashion. So tonight we have again a wonderful panel established here, and we will again welcome you to the space. Make yourself at home. If there's anything I can offer you to make you more comfortable, please let me know that. And without further ado, turn it over to George Friday.
Thank you so much, Louis. And thank all y'all for coming out. We hope that we create an informative, shared space of learning, and then lots of time for discussion and back and forth. So I'm going to be as brief as possible, so there's lots of time for our discussion later. I'm a native North Carolinian, so I care about the state. I grew up here, and I have always cared about issues related to justice. And that has expanded in many ways to be justice for my neighborhood and where I went to school as in grammar school and middle school, to a broader community over time. Not drastically broad, because I grew up in a low-income community in rural North Carolina, and most of my neighbors were low-income white folks and black folks and a few native folks. So I always approach things as if there are shared problems across race and ethnicity. But I did notice growing up, and of course how could you not in North Carolina, that racial profiling seemed to only happen to black and brown people. And I tested that. My first job out of college was in D.C. with what was Sane, Freeze, and then became Peace Action, because I thought peace was all of it. Y'all, I was like, 15, it's going to happen. And I thought, well, if we have peace, we've got the end of racism, the end of homophobia, the end of sexism, it's peace. But at any rate, let me bear, I'm blushing now. But then I moved to D.C. and I noticed the pattern of racial profiling. I only seen racial profiling in, rural North Carolina, Gastonia, Lincoln, hearing stories now and then, and most of my friends were in the, beta club, so we didn't have that many problems, we're geeks and whatnot. But then in D.C., I saw a pattern that was so severe. And what took it off the hook was one weekend my family came up to hang out, so my older brothers were there. Now this is my neighborhood that I've been running around for years, living, and all kinds of day and night, doing all kinds of things, going to the corner store to get whatever. And from my house to the corner store isn't even a whole block. And on the way there for like some ice, and on the way back, bringing the ice, my brothers were stopped twice. Twice there, twice back. Twice there, twice back. Ain't even further than here to where, if you start to go down the road, the road starts to corner, go around. You can almost see it. And I've been up and down, sometimes with a beer in my hand, sometimes no shoes, not really raggedy, but you know what I mean? So, to me, that made it really clear that it wasn't just, happenstance. It wasn't just something that happened now and then. It was a pattern. Of course, that was the 80s and 90s, right? Now, that pattern has a suspicion cloud over every one of us. And not just the cloud of suspicion, what might you be doing, what might you be thinking, but now, since January and indefinite detention as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, any of us, without charges, without access to a lawyer or your phone call, gone. You go out to the grocery store, and then, where'd Eric go? Did Eric go to the store? No, see Eric. 3 days later, 2 weeks later, you don't know where Eric is. So the concept that that's happening in our country is one that feels unbelievable, but is actual and fact. And if those of us who know that there can be something better are really clear that this is not anything close to what is intended by the land of the free, then it's our responsibility, our privilege, our right to band together and change that. Later on, I'll talk about how the Bill of Rights Defense Committee specifically does that, but one approach is that we look at profiling in all forms. So we ask those who are dealing with racial profiling based on the color of your skin, come on. Those of us who are dealing on profiling based on your immigration status, come on. Those who are dealing with the fact that because you go to a certain mosque, you dress a certain way, you practice a certain set of faith practices, then that puts a suspicion on you, well then you got to come on. Those of you who, because of how you dress and your sexual identity and choices, being racially profiled by the police on a regular basis, they come on. And then what do? We say, local law enforcement, you do not have the authority to do the job of ICE, to do the job of the Department of Homeland Security, to do the job of the FBI. So we don't want to hear anything about the war on drugs. We don't want to hear anything about the war on terror. We don't want you harassing people who might not be documented right now. We want you to do the job of local law enforcement only. And there are consequences if you go beyond that. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that later. Thanks for...
I'm the director of Friends of Human Rights, and originally from Tampa, Florida. Now we're sort of Iowa and Tampa. And I'm going to show you, later we'll be talking about preemptive prosecution, which is prosecution before crime takes place. And I'm going to give us some examples of it. And most of the people that I'm going to be talking about have spent a lot of time in solitary confinement, usually before the trial. So I'm going to show this short film about it so just to get a feel for what that may be like.
I forgot to tell folks this is Torture Awareness Month. June is
Yes.
Torture Awareness Month.
Yeah. And the National Religious Campaign Against Torture has a very good website.
The cell was probably like maybe 7 feet, maybe 9 feet long.
Maybe 9 by 6. It's very small.
The cell was a wooden cell.
The walls were cinder block.
The floor, it was concrete.
The bed is concrete. There's a small concrete slab that serves as a table.
We had nothing in one but you.
It's hard to describe, nothing.
You see a lonely body in a cell, and that's what solitary confinement.
Metal and cement. That was it.
The light,
There's lights on most of the night.
double neon light.
The light would be on sometimes 24/7. It never went out. The situation I was in, they never turned the lights on. The lights were out 24 hours a day. There was a big door that closed, and you didn't hear anything outside of the door.
It can get eerily quiet in these places.
Real quiet.
Most of what you're going to hear is your own breathing. You might hear your heart rate pumping up. And so when there is a noise, it's just nerve-wracking.
Coming onto the tier, it's a heavy steel door, and it opens a microphone, which means
I really wanted to talk to somebody, just somebody to be there.
You can go days without talking to people. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months.
You can't touch anyone.
Except for aggressive touching by guards when they were coming to chain me up to pick me out.
Even if you have family, there's no contact visits at all.
There's a glass in front of you with the person in the visiting room on the other side.
My daughters were trying to kiss the glass and kiss me through the glass.
It was painful. It's very painful.
I've spent 7.5 years in the control room.
Maybe about 12 years in lockdown.
Oh, that's 29 years. Yeah.
Many, many years in solitary confinement.
29 years. Solitary confinement is just as real could be. It could wipe the mind.
It damages you psychologically, because human beings need to interact with each other.
It's not normal to be in the dark for days and days and days on end.
I could hardly sleep. Like I had insomnia.
Waking up at night in the sweats, panic attacks.
It would trigger something in my nerves when I would break out in the house from head to toe.
I lost track of time.
There's no concept of time. You know the time in lockdown. There's sleep and awakeness. That's it. And the madness in between the madness.
I would try to hear things, try to hear human voices, and sometimes I would imagine that I was hearing voices.
You start hearing things that's not even being said.
And say, yeah. Yeah, what? And nobody's answering.
The anger, the rage, bitterness, the anxiety, the nightmares. And as years pass, it just seems like the walls in the cell close in. They begin to close in. You can feel your mind like trying to escape from it.
And what happens is chaos.
Insanity.
They'll say the end of the barrel. That's what the prison officials call
We
it.
call it maximum security, administrative segregation,
Statewide unit.
isolation.
Special housing.
Saying,
Only.
So many.
I would say torture chambers. No other way to describe it.
Of course it's torture. It's torture in every form of fashion.
So there are a lot of people being tortured in solitary confinement. A difference that people are going to tell you about is they spend time in solitary confinement before their trial and after the trial, almost always. And I'm going to tell you the kind of how I came to find out about preemptive prosecution. It's not something I knew about mostly growing up, but I was living in Tampa, Florida, and as an Elder Jar, who also lived in Tampa, Florida, this would have been sometime before 2003. He was being held in prison, solitary confinement in a federal prison with no charges and with secret evidence. Okay, he was, after about 3.5 years, when the judge finally looked at the secret evidence, some of it was a newspaper article written by Michael Fector of the Tribune. He was deported at that time. Why he was there is they were trying to get him to testify against Sami Al-Arian and incriminate him in some way, because they've been trying to arrest Sami for years. And if I did arrest him in 2003, and I'm not going to tell you too much about his case, but there's a film, USA versus Al-Arian, which I have one copy of that I can sell you. It's my last copy. Or you can watch it online also. And his trial it ended in 2005. He was, the jurors refused to convict somebody without evidence of a crime, but he was still in prison. It's been another 3 years in prison, in solitary. He was in solitary 2.5 years before his trial. And now he's been in house arrest for about 3.5 years with no end in sight. I don't know. And after this film came out, This is the film. It's by Dina Halverson. It's an award-winning film all over the world. It's really excellent. So Fred and I, at the camera, we started going around the country showing the film to people just to educate them, and we found out a couple of things. One is that people who were not Muslims did not have any idea this was going on. They were totally surprised, totally shocked. And we also found out that it's happening all over the country. Everywhere we went, we found stories. And I'm going to, just a sample of them, I'm going to tell you about them just from my Florida perspective. Like one of Sami's lawyers was Bill Moffitt. His next case was Dr. Ashkar, who was also a university professor. He was also acquitted by the jury, but they came back with obstruction of justice charges, and he got sentenced to 11 years, which he is currently serving, and he's in a communications management unit, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a few minutes. And Linda Marino was his other lawyer. She next went to the Holy Land case, and then we have heard of the Holy Land Foundation in Texas. It was the largest Muslim charity in the country, and they gave to lots of causes, not only Muslim causes. One of the places they gave money was to hospitals and schools in Palestine, and this is what the government did not like. It took them 2 trials, but they did manage to convict on the second trial. And this is one of the defendants. There were 5 of them. They're all in prison now. Mr. Alashi was sentenced to 65 years. And he's in a communications management unit. His family, his son Omar wants to, when he was leaving one time, he ran to give his father a hug. That's against the rules of these prisons, and because of that, Mr. Alashi wasn't allowed any contact with his family for a year and a half. And this is another Florida case, and it was fairly early on also, and these were just 7 guys in a poor area of Miami. They had a community service organization. They kind of ran it on a shoestring budget out of a warehouse. So when this paid FBI informant came along, they offered them a lot of money, and he starts talking about blowing up the Sears Tower, which is not something they were at all inclined to do and had no intention of doing. But they went to trial with them. They were accused, and the first trial, Lamoran was acquitted, the man on the top, but he was a 20-year resident, not a citizen, so he spent another 2 years in jail as they tried to deport him, and they succeeded at the end of that, and now he's in Haiti. And it took them 2 more trials to get convictions, and so they did manage to convict 5 of those people, and they are in prison right now. And it's somebody else that came to my attention. It was Fahad Hashmi had an apartment in England. He let a friend stay there for 2 weeks, and the friend stored some reindeer there, and he allegedly gave that reindeer to Al-Qaeda leaders. And because of that, Fahad was in pre-trial, very severe solitary confinement for 3.5 years. And at the end of that time, he used a plea agreement and got sentenced to another 15 years, and he's still in solitary confinement in the Supermax in Colorado right now. And she was Siddiqui's another case. He was kidnapped overseas just after he got married, brought back, and some of the things the government mentioned in there was that he took photographs of landmarks in Washington, D.C., and maybe he translated, I'm not sure, but he got 17 years for this. And the letter is actually Ahmed Abu Ali, and he was arrested in Saudi Arabia and kept there for 2 years without contact with lawyers or anybody, and tortured. And under the confessions, he confessed to lots of things under torture. He brought back to the United States. The confessions were allowed, and the fact that he was tortured was not allowed. He got convicted, and he's sentenced to life in the first 30 years. They appealed the sentence, and he got sentenced to life. He's in the Supermax in Colorado, which is like the underground dungeon. And being buried alive. I saw it. It was 23 hours of confinement in his cell. And local case is a really sad case. And Fred and I got to that trial several times. This is in Raleigh, for those of you who are here. And Ziyad was just sentenced to 32 years. You're going to hear more about him from his mother here, but I think if he had been willing to lie about other people, maybe he wouldn't be in jail today, but he wasn't that kind of person. So 32 years. Another one, just basic, was just convicted, not yet sentenced. And then the boy sons, and there's also Daniel Boyd, the father, but I said this is just a very sad case where none of these people did anything, but they're going to spend years and years in prison. And just to show you the scope of this, I'm going to show you some names. This list was compiled by Project Salam. He is one of the members of our coalition here in New York. And I got this off their website about 2 years ago. And they're continuing to compile names, and so there are more coming up. And I mentioned the communications management units. You're not familiar with them. The first one was opened in Terrible, Indiana in 2006. And the first, initially they were almost all Muslim, political prisoners. And then they brought in some other people to balance it. It's still mostly Muslim noise. It's very restricted. No contact visits. I think the phone calls have been up from 1 a week to 2 a week, 2 15-minute phone calls a week now. And they get 4 hours a month visitation, possibly 8 hours a month. It may have been raised in some of the prisons, and it's the high class ones, no contact visits at all. And just looking to the future. In our travels, Chopper is one of the first people we met in Columbia, North Carolina. He helped us with screening our film and all of this. And the FBI was kind of after him at that time, and they were hoping for a good outcome. But he had a lot of community support, which kind of helped him some, I think. But he's got a story. This picture, one picture is in the store at World Harvest Foods, which he operated in Columbia, North Carolina for a lot of years. But he had relatives.
Columbia, Missouri.
I think Columbia, Missouri. Sorry. He had relatives in Iraq who were dying because they couldn't get drugs during the sanctions and so. But when he threw, of course, he sent them money. And so he just a few weeks ago was sentenced to 3 years for sending money to his relatives in Iraq who were dying. And I have a petition, not that paper one, and this one. We're trying to send it to try to get President Obama to commute his sentence. So if you'd like to sign that, it would be great. And another case, this is another Tampa case, and I'm showing you this one because it had a good outcome, and because I think when the public gets together and they support, it can make a big difference. And in Yusuf Dahi was a student from Tampa, and he and another friend were on vacation in the summertime, and they stopped for speeding, and they had homemade fireworks in their trunk, so they're both charged with terrorism. And Yusuf went to trial, a lot of community support and a lot of media support because they all gave their sentence trial, got lots of attention. And so they all learned a lot from that about what goes on in courtrooms, and he was acquitted. And he had to be arrested, of course, by immigration because he had not obtained citizenship yet. It's like back in Cone Detention Center, Miami, and again, the first time in the history of the country, he was acquitted in both types of courts. And so he was acquitted, he went back to school, he graduated, and had a happy ending. And so I say we, as George mentioned, we are all in great danger now with an NDAA, and it's really time we need to all speak up, but we need to speak with one voice.
So Laila, you want to tell us what's been going on? You're going to have to talk loud because the air conditioner is kind of loud.
Okay, that's my son over there, Ziyad, with the cats, the kittens, and also his nephew. That's him with the kittens in Jordan. My son, he turned 18. He decided he wants to go and get married because we're Muslims, so we get married at an every age, so we're not fornicate or, commit adultery. So it's tradition in our family also to marry young. I married when I was 18. My mom married when she was 18. And he was trying to get a wife also when he was 18. So he went overseas to get married when he was 18. And he went to Jordan. That's, where I grew up kind of in Jordan and partially in the United States. So his father went there the first time, he was 18, and he met with a bride, it didn't really work out. He came back, and then he went back again when he was 19 with his co-defendant, his friend, Omar, in the picture down there. That's a picture of Egypt. They went to Palestine, they were denied entry, then they went to Jordan, and then from there they went to Egypt, because his friend was from Egypt. And they did go to the beach, and they both still were looking for brides, and after like a month or so, they came back. Well, before they went to, before my son went to Jordan, he knew Boyd, Daniel Boyd, for a very short while, and for some reason the FBI were very interested in Daniel Boyd, and he was talking a lot about the wars in Iraq and the wars in Afghanistan. He was very much against them, so that really bothered the FBI. That was very popular, and also he had some kind of mental issues, whatever. So my son just knew him for a very short while before he went to Jordan. When my son came back from his second trip with his friend, the FBI kept on harassing us and questioning both of them. They wanted them to say something about Boyd, and we don't know what really the FBI wanted my son or his friend to say. And they come from the ringleader, by the way. So afterwards, they kept on following us around, me and my son and his friend, wherever we went, boring life, usually working home. After 2 years of my son coming back from Jordan, they decided they wanted to arrest my son and his friend. So I had gone to run an errand for one of my older friends who doesn't drive, and I came back and I saw my son's cell phone on the computer table, and I started looking, for him and wondering what's going on. I was like getting really frantic. I had just this bad feeling in my stomach that something bad happened. Earlier, before I went to help this lady, he had marinated the chicken and cleaned up the kitchen and was about to surprise me with a nice meal for me. And then he went on to swim. So the SWAT team came over, it's just a show, of course, for the media. Helicopters and the SWAT team, it was the road, that we live on, and they arrested my son out of the pool. And I heard that it was done very inhumanely, and that they had the guns drawn on him. And they took him. So when I came back, of course, I'm wondering what's going on, where's my son? I see his cell phone, so I'm like really worried. So this same lady calls me, the one I ran her errands for, calls me and she's like, have you heard the news? I was like, what news? She said, your son is in jail. And I was like, for what? And then she told me, and I started screaming and running up and down the stairs and crying, So the next day, the FBI comes over to my apartment and tells me, about questioning me again. They questioned me again about Boyd, and I was like, what is it that you guys want from us? What is it that you want? So the guy tells me that they're trying to put so much pressure on my son and his friend because there's some piece of the puzzle missing, and that there's almost certain that my son and his friend know something about Boyd, and that if they pressure them enough and corner them enough, then they're going to admit whatever they want about Boyd. So and then he started asking me questions and said, I don't know what you want from us. Is it that, they're going to satisfy you if we lie? And I escorted him out to the door and I said, I want to see his face again. So, of course, my son was arrested for most of the time in solitary confinement and street trial. And then he was appointed an appointed lawyer, which really very defended my son. And the way the trial was, it was done also very, very biased. They had, we live in Raleigh, so they had the trial in New Bern, North Carolina, which is like 2 hours and 15 minutes away. The people were much older. Most of them were white people. There's probably one Hispanic guy who was arrested most of the time during the trial because it was very boring. They had an informant on Boyd, the one they called the ringleader. They had more than one informant, and they had vindicated him while he was talking about the wars and stuff like that. And whatever he mentioned, we're not even sure what he mentioned is what they say he mentioned, because we couldn't even hear the tape recordings. But yet, the 700 hours of tape recordings and video surveillance that they had, for instance, something was not clear, a lot of the tape recordings were clear. So they had some transcripts handed over to the jury that were filled in by the prosecutors. So the prosecutors could think that, okay, this is what he said, so I mean, the jury would think this is what he said, which he would probably not even have said that, but that's what the prosecutors want the jury to think. And then they kept bringing up my son's picture. They put up the stuff about boys and tape recordings, and then they put up my son's picture. Well, we thought since my son was not in any of the tape recordings, that, we're not going to, he's going to get acquitted, that we're not going to do the trial. So we're pretty optimistic. But of course, because everything was done very biasedly, and they said that, the prosecutors kept on convincing the jury that the marriage, him going overseas to get married, that was going to be like, it's a code word for jihad. My son and his friend being at the beach, and every time they mentioned the beach, which in fact I have pictures on Facebook, that he did go to the beach with his friends. They said that was also a code word for jihad. And they brought in very biased material of people either beheading other people with masks, or they had their faces covered, or stabbing other people. It was very violent. So they showed that to the jury. They brought a guy that they call an expert guy about Muslim people. His name is Evan Coleman. I think he's a Zionist. He started saying bad things about Muslim people, and they tend to have a certain thinking, which will lead them to acts of violence. So actually, they're classifying Muslim people that they have a tendency of being violent. So then, of course, also, Daniel Boyd, the ringleader, pleaded guilty so he can save himself and save his kids, because they had the bigger charges on them. So Daniel Boyd, I think he had 14 charges or 12 charges. I think most of them were dropped. It was down to 2. His sons, the charges were changed to something lesser. So they also pressured my son at the beginning. They pressured my son and his co-defendant to be guilty. And my son said, no, I'm not going to lie against other people. I did not do anything wrong, so I'm not going to be guilty. He would have been out like in probably 4 or 5 years, 6 years maximum, versus he knew he was gambling his life, a life sentence versus 6 years. But these 6 years, you have to go lie against other people and, be selfish. So he didn't want to do that. So they went over to the ringleader, because also, he has family, still living, or not in jail. They lost all the family members who are the bread providers. They lost them, so for his selfish reasons, so he can keep the house, and he and his sons can get lesser sentences. He did plead guilty, and then he testified against my son. But the funny thing, there was no evidence against my son, except hearsay, and the FBI and the prosecutors would pressure the people to come say simple things, like, his ideas, my son's ideas were extreme. And up there. And that's basically, my story. If you guys have any questions, you're welcome to ask. Thank you all for coming. And mostly, very grateful for doing this whole thing. Thank you, guys.
Are there questions? I can take a step and see. Got one person, other folks? Go ahead.
Well, she mentioned that Ziyad got 31.5 years, but you didn't say how many years the so-called ringleader got. He got nothing.
No, he hasn't been sentenced, the father yet, but his sons have been sentenced. I think one got 5 and the other got 6, or it was, I think, 7 and 8. But anyway, because the time served will be counted, plus in federal jail, prison, it's 80% of the time. So one will be out in 2016, and one I think the year after that. And the father, they're waiting for him because the co-defendant, Anas Tuwasi, who just had his trial severed because he wanted to represent himself, they told him, if you do really good, and your sons, your sentence will be revisited. So they wanted him, because the case is are so weak. So they want to use these people to lie against, the other co-defendants, so the trial will, so they can win, so the prosecutors will win the trial.
Anybody else? No. So tell us, Eric Fink, about our rights. We got any rights?
Yeah.
That's what I like to say.
It's hard to be sort of it's hard. It's depressing to be the lawyer to come up and talk to you about the rights that you supposedly have after seeing the reality of how far these rights get you. In any event, what supposedly distinguishes us, supposedly, is that we have rights. We have a constitutional system. I'm a law professor, and I make my living teaching people to be lawyers and to believe that this is a system of laws, that we live under the rule of law. My job involves talking about this a lot. Sometimes I start to feel a little bit guilty doing that for a living when I hear, realities like this, realities that I already knew when I decided to become a lawyer, and see how much, how much of that is empty talk. I see the poster of Lynn Stewart here. She's one. I didn't know. I never knew Lynn personally. She was one of those people that led me to become a lawyer. Lynn and other people like her who have said, okay, look, we do supposedly have these rights. It's on the books, and the courts say that they enforce them. Let's try to hold them to them. Can't succeed. We've heard stories. Okay? So the fact that we have these rights, this is no guarantee against oppression. It's no guarantee about false prosecutions. But it's there. I tell my students, and I tell groups like this, rights are a story that we tell. Okay? It's not a thing that's out there that's magic. It's not the magic key or the magic wand that's going to get you out of trouble. But it's a story that people have. And it's a story that in this country, we're all supposed to believe in that story. And so at least understanding that story can be helpful, as long as you remember that at the end of the day, it is still just a story, and that the people who are showing up at your door to investigate you, the people who are prosecuting you, and very often the judge who's presiding over the trouble, they may not really believe in that story. Okay? They may know the backstory. All right. What is the story? The story is that you have certain rights, and the primary rights that are relevant here, there's a whole giant framework, right? You've spent 3 years of law school. There's 2 key elements in our Constitution. They're contained in the 4th and 5th Amendments to the Constitution. It applies at the state level under the 14th Amendment. And these are basic protections against abuse by authority of people's civil liberties. It's supposed to be a basic guarantee that the government authority will not arrest you, will not detain you, will not search through your stuff, will not lock you up without giving you certain procedural protections. And as part of that, that they can't compel you to tell them things that are going to put yourself in trouble. They can't compel you to tell them things that are going to get other people in trouble. So the 4th Amendment is this guarantee against warrantless and unreasonable arrest or search and seizure. Okay? The 5th Amendment is this guarantee against self-incrimination, the right to remain silent. Those are your rights. Okay, that's the law. That's what the law says, and you have those rights. The best I can do is explain to you what those rights are supposed to mean. And the best a lawyer can do in advising somebody is to say, be aware of these rights and don't lightly give them up. Try to assert them, but always remember that it's just a story that you're telling. Okay? It's not a guarantee, it's not a sword, it's not a shield. Okay? So, the police show up at your door. Okay? What rights do you supposedly have? The first thing is the police don't have the right to just come into your house and search through your stuff, okay, without having a good reason to do it. We call this very, they get very technical. There's things about reasonable suspicion and probable cause, different levels. But they have to have, supposedly they're supposed to have some reason. They're not supposed to just go on fishing expeditions and decide because a young man is of a particular ethnicity or subscribes to a particular religion or has visited particular countries that he must be up to something because those people are all like that. They're supposed to think, oh, he was, and not just because of who he's associated with, but we have a serious reason to believe that he was involved in some illegal activity or that he knows about someone else's illegal activity. when they show up at your house, whether it's to question you or to search, you have a right to say no. Okay? You have a right to say no when the police want to enter your house, unless they have a warrant. Okay? If they just knock on your door, you've all seen TV. Maybe some of you have experienced this in real life. You know, when they say, "Oh, can I come in?" They're always very polite at first, except when they're not. Ask to see the warrant. Now, if they don't have a warrant and you say, "I'm not letting you in," is that going to stop them from busting down the door? No, it's not going to stop them from busting down the door if that's what they want to do, right? And you never know what they want to do in a given situation. Ask them to see. Take a look at that warrant. If they have a warrant, they're supposed to show it to you. What a warrant is a police officer or some law enforcement official has gone to a judge and said, "Judge, here's information that I have. Here's the source of this information. I have my informants. I've been maybe tailing this person and observing this person. Here's the information that I have that leads me to believe there's reason to think this person is involved in crime." The judge is supposed to think, "Yeah, okay, that's, I hear this. Assuming that that's true, that leads me to think that there's something improper going on. We're going to let you search." Now, suppose what you suspect that person of doing is making explosive devices. Okay, so the warrant's going to say, we are going to come into your home and search for equipment for making explosive devices. That's what they're looking for. Okay? The warrant's supposed to specify what is it that they're looking for. And when they search, supposedly they're only supposed to search in places they can find. If what they're looking for is something that's really large, okay, if they're looking for, large semi-automatic guns, then they shouldn't be looking in little desk drawers where you couldn't hide a large semi-automatic gun. Now, if what they say is they're looking for material used for explosive devices, I guess you can keep some of that. Some of that is pretty small. You can keep that anyway. Okay. But can you keep that on your computer? Well, the warrant says maybe also instructions on how to build explosive devices, and then they're going to use that as an excuse to go through the computer. Okay? Again, you can't, as a practical matter, you can't stop them from looking where they've decided they're going to look. But by being aware of what the warrant says and monitoring that and objecting when they go someplace they're not supposed to, you're doing the best you can to preserve your rights. There are some cases, there are some situations where the police don't need a warrant to search you, to search through your pockets, to search through your car, even to search through your home. Okay? So, they see this and then they see you run and they watch you run into a house. Obviously, they can't go to a judge and get a warrant. By the time they get to the house, you're gone, right? They need the gun. They can be there in hot pursuit. They can come into they witness the crime. They can come in. They can look for the gun. Okay? Well, hopefully, you won't find yourself in that situation. But they'll often say it. Okay? There's a difference between what the law requires. The police know the law. Police are really well trained. When I practiced law, before I became a law professor, I mostly did labor law, and I represented mostly public employee unions, which don't exist here in North Carolina, or Pennsylvania, where I'm from, or at least where I live. And so I represented some police unions. So I knew a lot of cops. I know a lot of cops. I know what they do. Most of them, they're okay if they're your neighbor. They're not like all evil people out to hurt you. But they're trained in a certain way. And they're trained on what the law requires, and so they know what to say. And when they get into court, although they swear just like you to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, their idea of the truth is very different than maybe what your mom and dad taught you as a kid. Okay? Their idea of the truth is, what's the story that I need to tell to make my arrest stick? Okay? I once said that to a judge when I was called for jury duty. He yelled at me. So keep that in mind. They'll make up stuff. If you're stopped in your car, okay, the law says they're not really supposed to just be able to start rifling through your trunk, rifling through your glove compartment. They can do a quick sweep. If they stop in your car because you're speeding, and maybe they may want to look around and make sure there's not a weapon. Sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes people stop and police do get shot. But they'll say anything. They'll say, well, he made furtive movements. It's like a cliche. They have a little list of 17 things, 17 phrases that they're supposed to use. So try to get stopped by the cop, try to make furtive movements. If you make eye contact, they'll say you're suspicious because you make eye contact. If you don't make eye contact, they'll say you're suspicious because you don't make eye contact. If they decide that you're suspicious, they're going to decide that you're suspicious. But this is basically right. The key, and by the way, I meant to mention at the beginning, there are copies out here. Most of what I said tonight is summarized in this really handy pocket-sized pamphlet from the National Lawyers Guild, which is an organization that I've been a member of since I started law school, and it is a national organization of activist lawyers, progressive and radical lawyers, and people like Lynn Stewart, who have been for many, many years, since the 1930s when this organization was founded, at the front line of trying to represent people in political cases, okay, broadly defined. To try to say, okay, we have these rights, let's try to make the best of them. Okay? So I hope that you'll grab a copy of this. And it's also available on the Lawyers Guild website for download. So you can find that. So there's some more information here about that. One of the things it mentions in here, and it's the best advice I can give you, it's really the best you can do. Keep telling the police you don't consent. Again, is that going to stop? They're going to say, oh, you don't consent. Okay, I'm very sorry, man. No. But say it, and especially if there's other people around, say it loud. You know, if you're stopped on the street or if they come to your house, make it very clear, I do not consent to your search. Because if they say, if you consent, you're allowed to waive these rights. You're allowed to voluntarily say, oh, I just want to cooperate. I have nothing to hide. That's how I was brought up, right? You have nothing to hide with police. They're out there to get the bad guys and protect you. And they're trained, so one thing they're trained is what the courts want to hear. Okay, they know what story to tell when they're called to testify. The other thing they're trained is to get how to get you to give up your rights. And they're really good at it. They're extremely good at it. It's the easiest thing in the world for me to say, demand to look at the warrant. Don't voluntarily let the cop into your home. Don't, voluntarily let them rifle through your stuff. Tell them you don't consent. But again, you've all seen the shows, you've all seen the movies. Maybe some of you have experienced this. They are very persuasive. And they will tell you. They'll tell you in a nice voice if they think that'll work, or they'll tell you in a not so nice voice if they think it'll work. Oh, you have nothing behind. We just want some information. I'm sure that you heard all this when they came. We just want some information. We're not after you. It's better for you. Help yourself. Help us. They are never your friends. What they're telling you, it may be true in your case, it may be false in your case, but you have to assume that it's false. They don't typically go and try to talk to people or search through people's homes or cars or stuff because they have no interest in that person. So if they're coming to you and trying to talk to you and question you and searching your stuff, you have to assume that they're potentially looking to build a case against you. And you might say what you think is the most innocent things. You might tell them the truth about, that what your son was doing in the beach in Egypt. They're just going to make of that whatever you say they want. Okay? There's nothing to be gained ever by just agreeing to let them search you or just agreeing to answer their questions, at least without a lawyer present. There's never anything to be gained. But that's easy for me sitting in this room to say. It's really hard to stick to in that situation when you've got, let alone just one cop in a little uniform versus, a flock of FBI agents showing up at your door when you're a mom whose kid is being held someplace. The other right you supposedly have is this right to remain silent. You've all seen that's the famous Miranda warning. The police are supposed to tell you that when they detain you. One very important thing, always to ask when the police stop and question you. In any situation, whether you're walking down the street, whether they come to your home, whether they come any time, always ask them, am I being detained? Am I under arrest? Am I free to go? Okay? Now again, they might give you a straight answer. They might try to change the subject. You want to know that. If they tell you you're free to go, that means you're free to go. And if they tell you you're free to go, my suggestion, I'm not here as your personal lawyer, I can't give you individual legal advice, but my social suggestion to you is if they say you're free to go, go! At that point, there's nothing to be gained by talking to them. Okay? Turn around and walk away. Don't run away, because as soon as you start running away, they decide you're suspicious, right? And you're being detained, and now you're in custody, and now they're supposed to give you these warnings. You have the right to remain silent, you have a right to an attorney, all that stuff. Okay? And at that point, what you should say, the best thing to say is, I have nothing to say to you, I want a lawyer. I will not talk to you until I speak to a lawyer. It's really important in that situation, if you're going to assert that right, to be really firm. Don't be hesitant. Don't say, if you say, I think I might want to talk to a lawyer, that doesn't count. If you say I want to talk to a lawyer and then you keep talking to them, it doesn't count. Okay? So you've got to try to be really steadfast, but in the face of potentially violent authority. At least you can let them know you're not the easy target. One thing that the police and the authorities in these situations are like any other soldier. You know, if they see that you're going to be inconvenient, then they're likely to find someone else to do it. The last thing to mention, because it's so much of a thread behind Laila's story, even if you're not the target, every one of these cases illustrates it. The entire system of policing and prosecution in this country is built on a snitch system. This is how prosecutors make their cases. Prosecutors make their cases by going after, trying to pick off the people on the fringe who they think might know something about someone, who knows something about someone, who knows something about someone, until they get the person who they want. Okay? So you may not be the target, but what they're still going to do is put you under pressure, put you in a situation to try to get you stuff. Now here's the curious thing, that's the last thing I'll mention. The police, the authorities, the FBI, government agents are allowed to lie to you. That's the law. They're allowed to say anything they want to you to try to get you to cooperate with them. So they can tell you any lie. And nothing that they say is binding against them, when they're investigating. You are not legally allowed to lie to them. If you lie to a government agent, that itself is crime. Even if you haven't done anything else wrong, you're now guilty of misinforming them, charged with obstruction of justice. Okay? So it's very one-sided. They can and will lie to get you to say what you want. You can't lie to them. Until they want it's a lie. Until they think that you telling a lie will help them, and then they're going to try to pressure you into telling a lie. And that's what the whole snitch system is built on. And without that snitch system, prosecutions in this country grind to a halt. That's how most cases are made.
Just as Eric was saying, our constitutional rights aren't magic wands or incantations from Harry Potter that can make things worse. The work of the Bill of Rights Defense Committee will not immediately fix any of these horrible situations. It's one of the reasons I like partnering with Mel and the coalition to do these presentations, because our work does, however, stop it from happening in the future. And our work successfully will make sure it doesn't happen anywhere again. What's really unique and powerful about the Bill of Rights Defense Committee's approach is that we are at the same time taking on every form of racial profiling at the local level. So what we do by having that at the local level means that people of Greensboro get to say, here in Greensboro, here is what our local law enforcement is limited to do. In Greensboro City, in Guilford County. And based on that, and our model ordinance, and if you do sign up out here, then I can send you the link to the model ordinance, because it's about 10 pages long, but it's not that long. Because it's very detailed, it covers why we protect political dissent in very specific ways. Protesting on the street, protesting in a march, protesting one-on-one, it's all detailed in there. How we protect people who may not be documented, all of those details. How we can protect someone based on their religion or their faith or their practices, and how they dress based on their religion and faith and practices. Now, that model ordinance then would be passed by the City Council of Asheville. And that means, for instance, that if someone stopped because they don't have the tag isn't right on their car, and it's revealed that, wow, they're not documented. Not only is their tag not right on their car, but they're not documented, we're going to give them a ticket, and when they're running the ticket, something comes up from ICE saying detain them because they're not legal. No. When this ordinance is passed, the local law enforcement does not detain them. They let them go. They do not respect an ICE detainer. Those provisions specifically have been passed by cities that are working with Bill of Rights Defense Committee in Hartford, in Northampton, in Berkeley, and in DC. So in all those cities, if ICE says to somebody, we want you to detain those folks, the local law enforcement say, no, we're not doing it. And the same different parts of the ordinance affect whether or not someone wants information sent to a fusion center. No, we're not going to cooperate with DHS or FBI and send information to the fusion center. And our strategy long term is we get enough local cities to pass this. They're joining together and they're saying, no, we will not respect your federal authority over. It is an aggressive strategy because it's saying, how you like me now, federal government? What? So eventually, they are going to get annoyed, and they say, these cities, these dozen, these 2 dozen, these 3 dozen cities, and that, we want that. We want to, it's aggressive, we want to push the issue to the point where, you mean you're going to say that your authority is better than people in Greensboro? We want to push that, because that is that boiling point, that moment that Tim might speak to, or any of us speak to, who want real democracy in this country. I've been a social justice activist since I was 14 years old. I've never felt like the Constitution had anything to do with me. I would like it to. I'd like the opportunity to make that happen. It's not real now. I've never deluded myself about now. But now as I'm going from 14 to almost 54, I believe it's about time we make something happen. And through this particular strategy, bringing undocumented, African American, gay and lesbian, peace and justice activists, South Asian Muslim folks together and saying, no, it's not going to happen, at least not in Greensboro, it gives us that opportunity to make it real for everyone. It's immediate relief if you're not documented. It's immediate relief if you're African American. Now you got to know about it. That's the other thing. We can't get it past not tell folks. Because then if you don't know, when you're stopped, you don't know, wait a minute, you can't send that information off to such and such. Wait a minute, you can't go through my pockets. So we both have to work together to pass the ordinance and work together to educate people about it. That process actually has taken several years in some places. We start out by just bringing the partners to the table, go to the mosque, bring the imams, bring all the people of faith, bring the folks who are in the African American community doing civil rights work for a long time, bring the folks who are dealing with being undocumented. And those folks will have remedies right away. If you know that your information isn't going to get sent to ICE, that feels good right away. So I'll follow up with y'all. Louis Beveridge knows I'm like a broken record. Send that ordinance out. Let's make it happen. So thanks for that. And that is a next step of something we can really do. There is a way that the concept of freedom and democracy is a story, but it's a story we're not willing to let go of. So I look forward to y'all connecting with us and us building to make that story a real reality for everyone we can touch. So thanks so much for coming tonight. Thank you.